Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I'm ready to do my full review on the Troodon. This is, of course, the Microtech Mini Troodon, as it is named on paper, but as it's known around here, this is the Troodon, because it is a small, stubby, miniature version of an OTF. I've done my unboxing and first impressions of this knife already, and this may be somewhat redundant, so warning if you hate redundancy in my videos, but I've learned a little bit more about this knife since filming my first impressions. I've had this actually for a couple of weeks now. It's been in my pocket as a secondary probably 8 or 9 times, if I had to guess. More than half of the time it's been in my back left pocket, and then it's been in my coin pocket a few times as well. And I feel like I've gotten a pretty good feel for this knife. An interesting thing about Microtech's lineup that I've kind of learned over time is even though they offer several different OTFs, I'm finding there's more difference between each kind of lineup than I thought there were on the surface when I was getting into the hobby. So like the Ultratech series, there's the Ultratech, the UTX-85, and the UTX-70, which is the tiny version, medium version, and regular version, right? Those knives are much more like slender, even though they don't, like if you look at them in photos and even holding them in hand, they don't seem all that much more slender, right, in this direction, here to here. But in actual like practice, compared to the Troodon and the Combat Troodon and now the Micro or Mini Troodon, they're just, let me grab my UTX-70 so I can show you. They're just, these are thicker in that dimension, right? And so what that ends up meaning in application is that you just have a much wider blade. So even this one's double-edged, it makes it even worse of a comparison. But if you imagine this was a single-edged version, you just have less space to achieve a proper grind on the blade, right? So on the Troodon, this being the Mini Troodon, when you've got the single-edged version of these, you actually get a decently tall primary bevel there. And that means a better cutting edge. Just in general, for most uses, especially in like what I do with EDC knives, a taller grind is almost always a good thing. It's rare that I'm like, this grind should be lower. I don't think I've ever said that. I like it when, like, in general, when I look at my taste in knives and in the way that I use knives and how I like them to perform, it's better for me when the grind goes higher. So the width of the blade just gives you more real estate to do that. I wish that this was like a full flat grind or something. That would be sweet. That would make this even more compelling for me, for sure. But it's weird because OTFs, I grapple with them. If you've watched many of my OTF reviews, you've probably seen that I'm not really on board for them as actual EDC knives. I often say things like, for an OTF, this is pretty good, but I would never recommend an OTF as an EDC knife. I still don't really think I'm there with it. Like if I'm comparing a Microtech Ultratech, which costs, what, $300, to virtually any like $300 decent offering of like a frame lock. Say it's this Pina Moolah. The one that I'm going to say is going to be a way better performer in terms of EDC tasks is going to be this. This just isn't going to be as cool at shooting out the front and retracting back in, right? So to me, the allure in my head has always been like, what makes them cool is that they do this. And there are a whole category of knives called out the front. That is what makes them cool. But I guess what I'm getting at is I'm starting to learn that certain designs I'm finding work a little bit better in the like EDC task, for me, space that exists. And this one has surprised me by being as good as it actually is. And it's made me think, I've had a Combat Troodon. It was a long time ago though. And that was just a single edge, I think, drop point one. And that knife was a little bit too, like, crazy for me to carry very much, especially at the time. And it was very expensive for me, especially at the time. So I didn't really use it while I had it. I just did this with it a lot, right? But now I'm curious with a Troodon or a combat Troodon, if I'd find that they're actually, I think what I kind of want to try a regular Troodon, because the combat Troodon is a little bit big for me. A Troodon might be kind of on my list now after having this one, because I'm curious to see how the blade performs for actual cutting tasks. Because I've had the Ultratech, right? And I didn't find that that blade was good at cutting at all. It was not a good cutter. In terms of the metric of all of the other knives that I've owned, it is on the low end of cutting performance. Not because the blade steel is bad or because they did put a bad edge on it from factory, just because it was so thick and had such a stubby grind on it. There just wasn't enough height on the blade to get there. Anyway, I might try a Troodon soon, because this has impressed me a little bit. So, something I should have said right from the beginning. This was loaned to me by Brandon, aka Everyday Minimalist, and he will be linked down below. Brandon has become one of my good friends in the hobby. We talk quite a bit. I've loaned him a few of my knives. You might see them over there on his channel, and he's been generous enough to loan me this and another one, and I imagine we'll loan each other more knives going forward into the future. So, thank you, Brandon, for this. So let's talk about my typical categories and how this is actually stacked up into them. Because when I first got this knife from Brandon, I was planning on buying one just to make chode jokes. I was glad that Brandon offered to loan me his because it seemed like an expensive endeavor for just making jokes about. But now I'm more intrigued about this than I was going into it. I still love making the chode jokes about it, don't get me wrong, but this knife is better than I originally gave it credit for. So let's talk about ergos first. Ergos on this knife, not very good for me, and the specific reason for that is just that it's so small. Because of the size of this knife, if I do like a hammer grip, I just completely envelop this handle. And there's awkward things about it, right? Because then this switch goes into like the webbing of where my thumb meets my hand, and then the clip is kind of hot spotty in that way. If I choke back like I typically would on an OTF with a switch like this and use the switch as a thumb ramp, then I've got only 2 fingers on this knife because I'm trying to keep my thumb there. If I put my thumb up forwards, this blade, because it's an OTF, has a little play, and it just doesn't feel secure there. So I find myself putting my thumb like on the downward slope of this ramp. Like, it's just not comfortable there either, but it's just kind of the best I can make do with. And in that way, I get 3 fingers on, and then my pinky just kind of rests on the glass breaker a little bit, which we'll get to. Don't think I've forgotten about glass breakers. Anyway, ergonomically, the size makes it not so good. I don't love this knife ergonomically. The times when I've used it, I find myself doing weird, like, pinchy grips on it, where I'm just kind of, like, grabbing on it like this, and then I'm, like, even doing this kind of thing, like cutting packaging, holding it like a pen, like cutting tape with it a lot of the time. So it doesn't have to be super firm in my hand, but it worries me a little bit, deep down, when I have a knife in my pocket that isn't comfortable in my hand, and more importantly isn't confidence inspiring at least a little. Like, I've got other tiny knives. There's not a good one next to me, but consider like the Spyderco Lil Native or my Giant Mouse Ace Riv. Those are tiny knives. They're like as small as this, right? But I can get enough of a purchase on those that if there was no other knife on my body and I was in an actual emergency and you needed to use a knife, whether it's self-defense or just an emergency task, right? I would feel confident that I could hold on to those well. This, I don't get that. So ergonomically, it's not going to be a win. But, I mean, it's tiny. So a lot of tiny knives aren't great in hand. Now, let's talk about action. It's an OTF. It's a double action OTF, so that means it's automatic out and it's automatic in. This feels pretty much like any other Microtech that I've ever handled, OTF-wise. It doesn't have the same mass that the bigger ones do, so there's not as much like force moving through my hand, but it's just as satisfying, just on a smaller scale. It's just a little version of the same snappy OTF fun action that we all kind of crave out of OTFs. It's fun to play with. As like a fidget toy, it's great. I can do this a lot, and I have done it a lot. It's enjoyable to sit and just deploy and retract. So, action, if you're into OTFs, it's a win. It's a very good OTF action. Let's talk about carry. So, being tiny, made of aluminum, nice and lightweight, having a good deep carry clip on it, which actually goes my definition of deep carry, meaning all the way to the end of the knife. Some people think otherwise about deep carry, I'm learning, but it's a loop over style clip that goes all the way to the butt end of the knife. That carries all the way in your pocket. That's what I consider deep carry. All of those things are very, very good about it. Now, guess what's not good? This stupid freaking glass breaker. It's just, I'm not going to come down off of that mountain anytime soon. I think glass breakers on knives are stupid. I think they're a terrible idea. I don't see them being used productively by just about anybody. I think that the argument that if you live in a place where your car might go into water, you should have one on your knife, I disagree. I think you should have one in your car if you're in a place where you're worried that you're going to have to bust out your window to get out of your own car. Maybe you could make the argument that everyone, regardless of where they live, should have one in their car, somewhere that they can reach it in an emergency. I don't think it belongs on the butt end of a knife. If you disagree, so be it. I think it ruins an otherwise great deep carry clip because now you've got this stupid thing sticking out here. I think it looks tacky. I think it's annoying and gets in the way, and I just don't like it. I don't like it one bit. And the way it bothers me most on this knife is that it ruins what would be good deep carry otherwise. So there's that. But yeah, in my back left pocket, carries fine. In my coin pocket, carries well. Like it's a small, relatively slim, nice and lightweight little knife to have on you. So it's going to be pretty comfortable for me. It's just the glass breaker is really the only thing. Why is this struggling so much? The glass breaker is really the only thing that bothers me on carry-wise. It also bothers me if I were to put this knife in like a reverse grip or something. I talk about this a lot. I like to wrap my thumb around the top of a knife. I've had some weirdos in the comments say like, then you don't have enough grip strength or something. I disagree. I think if your handle profile is pretty neutral, like this is, and you don't wrap your thumb around something up here, there is inherently more probability that your hand will slip down onto the blade if you hit something harder than you mean to, thus cutting your fingers real bad, not being fun, than just having a comfortable spot to put your thumb. I don't know who could make an argument that it's a bad idea to have a comfortable spot to put your thumb back here, unless you want like a skull crusher on your knife, which is another thing I've heard people say about the glass breakers. Oh, well, it's really just an excuse to have a skull crusher. I don't carry knives to crush skulls, alright? If you do, I doubt you've ever crushed a skull. Maybe you have. I don't know. I find the whole thing, that's one of my biggest gripes with Microtech. And I really like Microtech in a lot of ways. This is one of the things that makes me not say, like, I'm not out there professing love for Microtech as one of my favorite makers of knives. If they didn't do glass breakers, they'd have a much more compelling spot in my heart. Anyways, we're probably getting too personal here. Sorry. So yeah, we've talked carry, we've talked action, we talked cutting, I think, because we talked about the blade. I guess we didn't really get too specific about cutting. Let's go into that a little bit more. So this one, being that it's a taller blade, still, all things considered, a very narrow blade, but taller than many of the other Microtech OTF offerings, I've been impressed with how well this knife has done at cutting. It's got this tanto on it, it's got a nice tip, it's sharp, and is it an excellent cutter? No. But compared to just about any other OTF I've ever handled, it's done better, which is amazing because it's tiny. It also makes me curious about knives like that. They make the money clip ones called the Exo set. That one has a real wide blade because it's such a wide profile. So maybe something like that I'll have to give a shot to see if it's a better cutting implement, although I imagine the ergos on that are going to be awful just based on wrapping it. I can't imagine it's going to feel good in the hand how thin and wide that is. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe I'll give one a shot. Anyways, cutting performance on this one is just better than any Ultratech I've tried cutting with. It's better than the Direct Delta that I just had recently. It's way better than this UTX 70 at cutting. It's just a better blade shape, I think, for actual realistic use. And with this being so tiny, I don't see this really being tactical or like self-defense knife. It really is kind of like a little utility blade at this point. It's something you pull out to open packages and stuff because it's so small. And so for those types of tasks, for opening boxes, it's good. Once you get bigger than that and you're like processing cardboard and stuff, I didn't love this for like cutting cardboard into big sections to put in the dumpster. What I did like is cutting tape and making small incisions and stuff like that. For that, it does good. So if you're like in an office and you want a fun desk letter opener, cool, this will do it for you. But its size is its biggest limiter, I think, in terms of its performance. It's part of what makes me also want to try a regular Troodon. Anyway, so cutting, being what it is fairly good. Still, compared to the vast array of other knives that I own and use, it's on the low end of performance, if I'm being totally honest. Carry, good other than the Glassbreaker. Glassbreaker kind of ruins that for me. Ergos, not so good. Just meh. And action, like I said, is good. As OTFs go, this is what you want out of them. Or at least is what I want out of them. It's consistent with my expectation of what an action will be from Microtech. So that's really kind of where I've boiled down on it. Do I love this knife? No. Am I going to go buy one for myself? Also no. I don't have like this, there's not going to be a hole in my heart when this knife goes back to Brandon, right? Not going to miss it so much. I'll miss making chode jokes about what's in my pocket. I'll miss that, right? But that was the compelling thing to me about this knife from the beginning, is making the chode jokes. What I can say, however, what I'll reiterate, is that I was surprised by how much this didn't suck. Because although it's not ideal, and it's not like an excellent EDC knife in the way that I judge knives, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be a joke in terms of its performance. I thought it was going to be kind of like the Spyderco Pochi, where it's just like a pointless little knife that's just to make jokes about. But this actually performs okay. It's tolerable. And I think, like I said, if you're somebody who maybe works in an office and you want to have a cool little OTF that maybe your coworkers think is cool and it's fun to show people and it's fun to fidget with and all that kind of stuff, and you're really not expecting it to do all that much stuff other than open some boxes and your mail, great. This'll do it for you. And I bet a lot of people that's actually all they're going to do with it anyway. So in that case, it's a fine offering. That's not enough for me out of knives. Not quite. I don't know. So I guess that's going to be where we end up on this one. So that'll be my full review of the Microtech Troodon. And again, thank you to Brandon, Everyday Minimalist, for loaning this to me. He will be linked down below. If you're somehow not subscribed to him, but you are subscribed to me, check out his channel. Subscribe to him. He's an awesome dude. And he makes great knife content. So, thank you all for watching. I'll see you on the next one.